As Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, when I put in for this question for short debate, I was of course aware that it was the day after the budget, after the first ping-pong on the Environment Bill, and the last day of the House sitting before the commencement of the COP26 climate talks. I thought that meant that I'd be able to bounce off the budget announcements that would take full account of the climate emergency and nature crisis, the former of which the Prime Minister has at least somewhat grudgingly acknowledged in his own words. I hoped, perhaps against hope, that we might have seen the government accept the majority of the 14 carefully considered amendments to the Environment Bill your Lordship's House sent to the other place, particularly crucial amendments on the power and independence of the Office for Environmental Protection and the acceptance of the need for interim targets, as provided under the Climate Change Act, as well as my own amendment on soils. And, particularly relevant to this debate, the amendment driven by the noble Lady Baroness Parmenter that would see the Treasury and the military included under the crucial 5 environmental principles at the heart of the Act. That would have seen us, as the chair of COP26, beginning this crucial fortnight for the future of the planet in, if not where our nation should be, at least a moderately prepared state. Instead, we can feel a palpable sense of shock across the nation at the delivery yesterday of a budget that can only be a reminder, for those old enough to remember it, of the movie Back to the Future. For the budget yesterday was one that, almost to the last word, could have been delivered in the year in which that film begins, 1985. The words climate and nature appear in it an easily measurable number of times, none. The word growth appears 14 times. The phrase biggest business tax cut in modern British history appears in a manner wholly redolent of that 6th year of Margaret Thatcher's Prime Ministership. The only significant new measure that the government might call green, a chunk of funding for new nuclear power, is also a return to 1985 and the movie where the dangerous vehicle that drives the plot is powered by plutonium, a reminder of how nuclear power seemed to be the future then, whereas it's clear now, to most of the world at least, that it's an outdated, astonishingly expensive, inflexible and deeply unreliable in delivery technology. Although, of course, it was that in 1985 that the first major international conference on the greenhouse effect in Villach, Austria, warned that greenhouse gases could, quote, in the last half of the next century cause a rise in global temperature which is greater than any in man's history, end quote, adding a risk of sea level rises of up to 1 metre. 36 years ago, what we now know was an astonishingly accurate warning, yet one that it seems that parts of this government at least, most notably the Chancellor and the Treasury, have still not heard. Yet we have a government that also says that it accepts the legal duty in the Environment Bill. Indeed, it wrote the legal duty in the Environment Bill, that ministers must have due regard to the environmental principles policy statement when making policy across government. And of course, the Treasury Green Book is an important guide to that policy making. Now, in a written answer to Green MP Caroline Lucas in the other place on June 16, Rebecca Powell confirmed, quote, these principles will be embedded into existing government policy-making guidance, including Her Majesty's Treasury's Green Book, close quote. Yet that policy statement still exists only in draft form, a draft that the government completed the consultation on the 2nd of June. You can read there on the government website that the results would be published within 12 weeks, which by my calculations is August 26. It's now October 28. In a written answer to the noble Lady Baroness Parmenter on Tuesday, Lord Goldsmith of Richmond Park for the government said that this result of the consultation would be published, quote, later in the year. This does not compute, and I hope that the noble Minister, the noble Viscount, will be able to provide a firmer timetable for the completion of this process, which would seem to be essential for the urgent process of making Her Majesty's Treasury's Green Book fit for the age of the climate emergency, something that the Green Alliance, among other organisations, has called for as a matter of urgency in its submission to that consultation. Now, the first of the 5 environmental principles listed in the Environment Bill is the integration principle. It's there on page 11 of the bill, quote, of the bill as in the current form, quote, "The principle that environmental protection should be integrated into the making of policies," close quote. Yet the Green Book and the budget are built on an assumption of growth as a desirable and achievable outcome of investment. Now I go to Professor Jason Hickel of the Institute for Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, writing in Nature Energy earlier this year, quote, "Established climate mitigation strategies assume continued economic growth in all countries and reconcile this with the Paris targets by betting on speculative technological change. Post-growth approaches may make it easier to achieve rapid mitigation while improving social outcomes," close quote. Carbon capture and storage, new nuclear, nature-based offsetting, check. That all sounds like speculative technological change. Not to mention it not being possible to square with number 5 of the environmental principles, the precautionary principle. And the Green Book starts with the idea of a project, then counts its effects. If it were to truly meet the environmental principles, it should surely adopt the approach of mission-oriented government, as advocated by Professor Mariana Mazzucato, founder of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL. To quote her, "Instead of having an industrial strategy that is a list of sectors government is going to give subsidies to, the question should be, what problems are we facing, climate change for example, and then work backwards to figure out how all sectors and actors in the economy can help deliver solutions," close quote. That's what a 21st century budget and a 21st century Green Book, fit for the age of shocks in which we live, on a planet where humans have stretched right up to and all too frequently exceeded its limits, the boundaries of what the Earth can bear, would look like. Indeed, the Treasury, in its own review of the Green Book in 2020, acknowledged serious faults: a failure to ensure that the strategic relevance of projects was clear from the outset, too heavy a reliance on benefit-to-cost ratio because of a lack of strategic direction in the appraisal process, faults that it has attempted to remedy since, with what I think is generally accepted as limited success. And there's also attempts through the supplementary guidance to integrate consideration of well-being in project proposals, and guidance for enabling a natural capital approach, something that, of course, the Treasury could be drawing on from its own Dasgupta review. But there's still no consideration of our inability to continue GDP growth, an alternative qualitative metric to benefit-to-cost ratio, or an assessment of the overall impact of Treasury spending, rather than a project-by-project approach. But I don't just want to posit this all in the abstract. I'm a Green, so of course I'm ready to set out solutions, and one worked-through example of this approach, to which I've already referred to in your Lordship's House, is the New Zealand Living Standards Framework, which is underpinned by 4 measured forms of capital that it directs be enhanced and protected: natural capital, human capital, social capital, and the combination of financial and physical capital. And if you look at the budget that was delivered in New Zealand this May, you can start to see what a truly green budget and Green Book approach could look like. It's called a wellbeing budget, and that's not just spin in the title. It's clear that the strategic direction driving every part of it is improving human and natural well-being. And it isn't just looking at this year, the problems of this moment. It has a focus on the well-being of future generations, an approach that the noble Lord Bird, of course, has been so clear in promoting in your Lordship's House, and that the Welsh Government is already well on the way to promoting, and that the UK Government really has yet to even consider. Underlying this is an ability to think systemically, to truly operate within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals that the whole of the world, the UK included, have signed up to. But I'm a realist, and it's clear that to suddenly update the Green Book to truly measure and advance in a balanced and systematic way natural, human, social and financial and physical capital will be well beyond the capacity of Her Majesty's Treasury. So I'm going to offer a simpler solution, one that would enable the government to expand beyond its 20th century outdated, misleading measure of GDP into at least 2 dimensions. It's something the Green Party's been proposing for many years, that each government decision, spending decision, each project have a carbon budget attached to it, as well as a financial one. Many critics have pointed out the lack of such in the government's other recent big announcements, the Net Zero Review and the Heat and Building Strategy. It's not that difficult. It's entirely appropriate, last sentence, for the chair of COP. So can the Minister tell me when the Treasury plans to provide at least that modest step towards systems thinking?